stop. Take a look at this. Would you ever eat this? A meal riddled with mold, often mixed with dirt, and sometimes human waste. In the Middle Ages, this wasn't just a bad meal. It was dinner. But what if I told you that some of their delicacies were actually slow poisons? Dishes that caused hallucinations, madness, or even a slow, painful death. Forget food poisoning. This was just Tuesday. Today, we're uncovering the most horrifying, disgusting, and outright deadly foods medieval people willingly put on their plates. And trust me, after this, you'll never look at your dinner the same way again. Before we dive in, I have to ask, what's the absolute nastiest thing you've ever eaten? Let me know in the comments below. And if you dare to finish this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Chapter 1. When Bread Could Kill You. Bread was the foundation of medieval life. For most people, it was not just a side dish, but the main source of survival. A medieval peasant could live days without meat, weeks without vegetables, but not a single day without bread. It filled their stomachs, kept them working, and prevented starvation, at least on the surface. What medieval people didn't know was that the food keeping them alive was also slowly destroying them. Most bread eaten in the Middle Ages was not the soft white bread we know today. That kind of bread was reserved for nobles and the wealthy. Ordinary people ate coarse, dark bread made mostly from rye or mixed grains. It was heavy, sour, and often damp, especially in colder regions of Europe. Rye thrived where wheat failed. It grew well in cold, wet climates and poor soil, which made it perfect for medieval farms. But rye carried a hidden danger, one that medieval people could not see, smell, or taste. The danger was a fungus called ergot. Ergot infected rye grains during damp harvest seasons. Once ground into flour, it blended in almost perfectly. Baking the bread did nothing to destroy it. When eaten regularly, ergot released powerful toxins into the human body. People didn't know they were being poisoned. They only knew that strange things started happening. At first, there was a burning sensation in the hands and feet. Then numbness. Then pain so intense it felt like fire under the skin. Fingers turned black, toes followed. In severe cases, entire limbs died and fell off due to gangrene. Medieval people called this condition St. Anthony's fire. They believed it was a curse, a punishment from God, or the work of demons. In reality, it was bread. Here is the shocking truth. Entire villages were poisoned at the same time simply because they all ate bread from the same harvest. Hallucinations were common. People saw angels, monsters, and visions of hell. Some screamed uncontrollably. Others collapsed in violent convulsions. Priests recorded mass episodes of possession, never realizing the source was sitting on every table. Shocking fact: many medieval religious visions and demonic possession cases were likely caused by ergot poisoning. Despite all of this, people kept eating the bread. They had no choice. Throwing away grain meant risking famine. Even if bread smelled bad or looked moldy, it was still eaten. People scraped off visible mold, soaked bread in water or ale, or baked it again, hoping it would become safe. It never did. During years of poor harvest, bread became even more dangerous. To stretch flour, people mixed in whatever they could find: ground peas, tree bark, straw, crushed acorns, sometimes even powdered bones. These fillers damaged digestion and caused severe intestinal problems, especially in children. And then there was the sand. Millstones slowly ground themselves down during use. Tiny particles of stone mixed into flour over time. Medieval bread often contained enough grit to slowly destroy teeth. Skeletons from this period show teeth worn almost flat, exposing nerves and causing chronic pain and infections. Shocking fact: medieval people didn't lose teeth early, they ground them away by eating bread. Social class determined how deadly your bread was. Nobles ate white wheat bread, finely sifted and relatively safer. Peasants ate coarse black rye bread, packed with toxins and contaminants. Poverty wasn't just hunger, was constant poisoning. Some hospitals in medieval Europe treated only victims of St. Anthony's fire, the monks running them, unknowingly discovered the real cure. They fed patients clean wheat, bread instead of rye. Many recovered, but doctors didn't understand why it worked. They believed the healing was divine. Bread was blessed before meals. It was broken and shared. It symbolized life. No one suspected it, and that is what made it so dangerous. The most deadly food in medieval Europe wasn't exotic or rare. It was the most ordinary thing imaginable. Bread. Chapter 2, Rotten Meat, Diseased Animals, and Why Medieval People Ate Them Anyway. Meat in the medieval world was a luxury, but it was also a gamble. Unlike today, there were no refrigerators, no freezers, and no real understanding of bacteria. Once an animal was killed, the race against decay began immediately, and most of the time, decay won. Fresh meat was rare for ordinary people. Peasants might eat meat only a few times a year, usually during festivals or after slaughtering an animal that could no longer work. When they did eat meat, it was often already questionable. Animals were not slaughtered because they were healthy. They were slaughtered because they were injured, old, or sick. A cow that stopped producing milk, a pig that broke a leg, a sheep covered in strange sores. Eating a sick animal was seen as practical, not dangerous. Letting it die naturally would mean total loss. Slaughtering it at least provided food. No one understood disease transmission. When medieval people ate meat, they weren't just eating protein. They were eating whatever disease that animal carried. Meat spoiled quickly, especially in warm months. The smell of rot was common, but smell alone wasn't always a reason to throw food away. Instead, people relied on heavy salting, smoking, or boiling to make it safe. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. Salted meat could hide the taste of decay. Smoking could mask the smell. Spices, when available, were used not to improve flavor, but to cover up rot. Shocking fact: spices in medieval cooking were often used to disguise spoiled meat, not to enhance good meat. If meat turned slimy or green, people scraped off the worst parts and cooked the rest. Boiling was believed to cleanse food. If it came out of the pot hot, it was considered safe. It wasn't. Parasites survived. Bacteria survived. Toxins remained. Pork was especially dangerous. Pigs were everywhere in medieval towns. roaming streets, eating garbage, human waste, and dead animals, they were efficient, cheap, and incredibly unhealthy. Pork carried parasites like tapeworms and roundworms. Undercooked pork could leave people infested for years, slowly draining nutrients from their bodies. Yet pork was one of the most common meats eaten, because pigs were cheap. But the real danger came during famine. When food ran low, rules disappeared. Animals that died of disease were butchered. Horses, dogs, cats and rats were eaten. Anything with flesh became food. Historical records describe people eating animals that had died days earlier. Meat was cut away from bloated carcasses, boiled heavily and consumed despite the stench. Shocking fact, medieval people often ate animals that had already begun to decompose. Food poisoning was common, but it wasn't recognized as such. People blamed bad air, curses, or divine punishment. Violent vomiting and diarrhea were accepted risks of eating meat. Many didn't survive it. Meat was also dangerous long after it was cooked. Leftovers were kept at room temperature. Stews were reheated repeatedly over days. Each cycle increased bacterial growth. Children and the elderly were the first to die. For the wealthy, meat wasn't always safer. Nobles ate large quantities of meat, often undercooked to show status. Rare meat was seen as superior. This exposed them to parasites and infections just as deadly as rot. Banquets sometimes ended with guests violently ill dead days later, and still meat remained a symbol of power and survival. Medieval people knew meat could kill them, but hunger was worse. Eating dangerous food was not recklessness. It was necessity. They didn't eat rotten meat because they were ignorant. They ate it because the alternative was starvation. Chapter 3: Milk, Cheese, and the Hidden Dangers of Medieval Dairy. Milk in the medieval world was considered a blessing. It was filling, nutritious, and one of the few reliable sources of fat and protein for ordinary people. For children, it was often the difference between survival and starvation. But milk was also one of the most dangerous foods medieval people consumed. Fresh milk spoiled incredibly fast. Without refrigeration, it could turn sour within hours, especially in warm weather. Medieval people knew this, which is why milk was rarely drunk fresh. Instead, it was turned into cheese, butter, or curds as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, these processes did not make dairy safe. Milking was done by hand, often in filthy conditions. Cows stood in mud and manure. Buckets were rarely cleaned properly. Water used for washing was often contaminated. Every step introduced bacteria, and no one could see it. Milk carried pathogens that medieval people didn't understand: tuberculosis, brucellosis, and other animal-borne diseases passed easily from cow to human through dairy. Shocking fact number 1. Medieval dairy products helped spread diseases from animals directly into the human population. Cheese was considered safer than milk, but it came with its own risks. Soft cheeses spoiled quickly and developed mold. Some molds were harmless. Others produced toxins that caused severe illness. People judged cheese by smell and taste alone. If it didn't immediately make them sick, they kept eating it. Butter was another problem. It was often stored at room temperature and turned rancid fast. Rancid butter wasn't thrown away, was eaten anyway, or used in cooking to avoid waste. Children were especially vulnerable. Weaning often involved milk-based foods. Infections from contaminated dairy killed countless infants. But these deaths were blamed on fate or God's will. Shocking fact, number A, contaminated milk was a major contributor to medieval infant mortality. In monasteries, dairy consumption was high due to restrictions on meat. Monks consumed large quantities of cheese and milk-based dishes, leading to chronic digestive illness. That was seen as spiritual weakness or divine testing. Fermentation helped, but it wasn't a guarantee of safety. Some cheeses trapped dangerous bacteria inside dense wheels, allowing toxins to build up over time. There were no expiration dates, no pasteurization, no understanding of germs. Dairy could look perfectly normal and still kill you. Shocking fact number 3, medieval. People often fell violently ill from dairy that showed no visible signs of spoilage. Milk was life-sustaining, especially for the poor, but it was also a silent killer, striking infants, the sick, and the elderly first. Medieval people didn't fear dairy.com. They trusted it, and that trust came at a deadly cost. Chapter 4, Water, Ale, and Why Drinking Could Kill You. In the medieval world, drinking water was one of the most dangerous daily activities a person could do. Rivers, wells, and streams were shared with animals, used for washing clothes, and often served as open sewers. Clean water, as we understand it today, simply did not exist. People drank from the same rivers where waste was dumped. Human excrement, animal carcasses, and industrial runoff from tanners and butchers all flowed into medieval water sources, yet this water was still used for drinking, cooking, and washing food. No one knew that water could carry disease. When people fell ill after drinking, they blamed bad air, seasonal changes, or God's will. The idea that invisible organisms in water could kill was unimaginable. Shocking fact. #1. Medieval water sources were often contaminated with human waste. To reduce risk, many people drank ale instead of water. Ale was weak, often containing very little alcohol, and it was consumed by adults and children alike. It was believed to be safer because it was boiled during brewing, but ale was not harmless. Brewing water was often contaminated before boiling, and fermentation was inconsistent. Ale spoiled quickly and was drunk fresh, sometimes only hours after brewing. When it went bad, it caused severe stomach illness. Ale was also thick and filling. For the poor, it replaced meals entirely. Shocking fact number 2. Medieval, children drank ale daily because it was considered safer than water. Wine was safer, but expensive. Only the wealthy could afford it regularly. Even then, wine was often diluted with water, bringing the danger back in. Wells weren't safe either. Many were dug too close to latrines. Waste seeped into groundwater, turning wells into invisible poison sources. Entire households could become sick at once. Outbreaks of dysentery and other waterborne illnesses swept through. Towns without warning. People weakened rapidly, dying from dehydration and fever. Boiling water could have helped, but fuel was expensive. Most people saved firewood for cooking food, not purifying drinks. Shocking fact number 3. Many medieval deaths from fever were actually caused by contaminated drinking water. Monasteries and castles sometimes had better water systems, but even these failed during floods or sieges. When wells were poisoned or cut off, people drank whatever they could find: stagnant water, melted snow, even water mixed with vinegar or herbs to balance it. Drinking was not refreshing. It was risky, and yet medieval people had to drink every day. They survived not because their drinks were safe, but because their bodies adapted just enough to keep going. Chapter 5: Vegetables, Herbs, and the Plants that Poisoned Medieval Tables. Vegetables are often imagined as the safest part of the medieval diet. Compared to rotten meat or contaminated water, plants seem harmless. In reality, vegetables and herbs carried their own deadly risks, especially in a world without botany, toxicology, or food safety knowledge. Medieval people gathered plants based on tradition, not science. If something had been eaten before, it was assumed to be safe. If it resembled a known plant, it was often used without question. This led to deadly mistakes. Roots, leaves, and berries were commonly foraged from forests and fields. Some were nutritious, others were poisonous. Many looked nearly identical. Shocking fact number 1. Medieval people regularly poisoned themselves by confusing edible plants with toxic hemlock, deadly nightshade, and monkshood grew naturally across Europe. These plants were known, but not always recognized correctly. A small mistake in identification could be fatal. Even familiar vegetables were dangerous. Raw cabbage, onions, and beans were believed to cause illness unless prepared correctly. Cooking methods were based on belief, not evidence. When sickness followed, vegetables were blamed for cooling the blood or disturbing the humors. Manure was the primary fertilizer. Human and animal waste was spread directly onto crops. Vegetables were often eaten with minimal washing, especially by the poor who lacked clean water. Shocking fact number A. Medieval vegetables were frequently contaminated with human and animal waste. Herbs were used as medicine and seasoning, often in large quantities. The line between healing and poisoning was thin. Many herbs were toxic at high doses, but dosage was guesswork. People believed stronger medicine worked better. This led to overdoses that caused organ failure, hallucinations, or death. Children were especially vulnerable. Small bodies could not tolerate the same plants adults consumed. Vegetables were also seasonal. During famine, people ate plants normally avoided. Bitter roots, wild leaves, and even grass were boiled and consumed. Shocking fact number 3. During famine, medieval people ate plants that were normally considered unsafe, leading to mass poisoning. Some vegetables we eat today were feared or misunderstood. Tomatoes were considered poisonous for centuries. Mushrooms were especially risky. A single mistake could kill an entire family. Despite the danger, vegetables were essential. They prevented starvation and provided nutrients missing from bread-heavy diets. Medieval people didn't avoid vegetables because they were ignorant. They feared them because they were unpredictable. Every meal carried a risk. Even the plants. Chapter 6: Sweet but Deadly. Honey, sugar, and medieval poisoning. Sweet foods were rare in the medieval world. For most people, sweetness meant honey. Sugar existed, but it was expensive, imported, and treated more like medicine than food, because sweets were uncommon. They were believed to be harmless, sometimes even healing. That belief was dangerously wrong. Honey was widely used in cooking, medicine, and drink. It lasted a long time and didn't spoil easily, which made it seem safe. But honey reflected whatever the bees had collected. When bees fed on toxic plants, the honey became poisonous. Certain plants, like foxglove, monkshood, and rhododendron, produced nectar that caused honey to carry dangerous toxins. Medieval people had no way of knowing which honey was safe. Shocking fact number 1. Medieval honey could cause poisoning, hallucinations, and death depending on the flowers nearby. This phenomenon, now known as mad honey, caused dizziness, vomiting, slowed heart rate, and loss of consciousness. Entire households could fall ill after sharing a single batch. Sugar, when available, came with different dangers. It was often unrefined and contaminated during transport. Sugar loaves absorbed moisture, filth, and sometimes insects while stored. Because sugar was rare, it was used excessively when available, especially in medicinal syrups. Doctors prescribed sugar-heavy remedies, believing sweetness balanced the humors. These treatments often worsened illness. Teeth suffered badly. Cavities were common, painful, and untreated. Infections spread easily from the mouth into the bloodstream. Shocking fact. Number A. Medieval dental infections from sugary foods could spread and become fatal. Sweet syrups were given to children and the sick. Combined with contaminated water and dairy, these mixtures became perfect breeding grounds for bacteria. Honey was also fed to infants, sometimes mixed with herbs. Infant botulism was unknowingly triggered, leading to sudden deaths blamed on fate. Shocking fact number 3. Feeding honey to infants likely killed many medieval babies. Sweetness symbolized health and wealth. The richer the food tasted, the more powerful it seemed. But sweetness hid danger. Medieval people didn't fear sugar or honey. They trusted them, and that trust was deadly. Chapter 7. Fish, Seafood, and Eating the Sea's Poison. Fish was one of the most important foods in the medieval diet, especially during religious fasts when meat was forbidden. On many days of the year, entire populations were required to eat fish instead of meat. This made seafood a staple, not a luxury, and that made it dangerous. Fresh fish spoiled faster than almost any other food. Without ice or refrigeration, fish began to rot within hours of being caught. Inland communities faced even greater risk. Fish often traveled days before being eaten. By the time it reached the table, decay had already begun. To preserve fish, medieval people relied on heavy salting, drying, and smoking. These methods slowed spoilage, but did not eliminate toxins. In many cases, preservation simply masked the smell of rot. Shocking fact. 1. Medieval people regularly ate fish that had already begun decomposing. Salted fish was extremely common, especially among the poor. It was hard, dry, and often infested with insects. People soaked it in water to soften it, using the same contaminated water that caused illness in the first place. Shellfish were even more dangerous. Oysters, mussels, and clams filtered polluted water and concentrated toxins inside their bodies. Medieval coastal waters were often contaminated by human waste. Shellfish poisoning caused paralysis, severe illness, and death. But medieval people had no idea why. Shocking fact number 2. Medieval shellfish concentrated toxins from polluted water and passed them directly to humans. During fasting periods, fish consumption increased dramatically. People who were already weak from poor diets suddenly relied almost entirely on seafood. This led to outbreaks of illness mistaken for divine punishment. Dried fish was often stored improperly. Mold grew easily. Some molds produced toxins that survived cooking. Fish sauces and pastes were reused repeatedly. When they turned foul, they were still eaten to avoid waste. Shocking fact number 3. Medieval fish preservation methods often made food more dangerous, not safer. Even the wealthy were not safe. Large fish, like pike and eel, accumulated toxins over time. Eating them regularly caused chronic illness. Fish symbolized purity and obedience, but it carried poison from the water straight to the table. Medieval people followed the rules. Their food punished them for it. Chapter 8. Spices, Preservatives, and the Dangerous Fixes. In the medieval world, spices were more than flavor. They were medicine, status symbols, and preservatives all at once. When food smelled bad or tasted wrong, spices were added not to improve quality, but to hide danger. This made them incredibly powerful and incredibly risky. Spices were expensive and traveled long distances. By the time they reached Europe, they had passed through countless hands, warehouses, and ports. Contamination was common. Moisture, mold, insects, and dirt mixed freely with valuable powders. There were no purity standards, no inspections, no guarantees. Shocking fact number 1. Medieval spices were often contaminated with mold, dirt, and insects before reaching the kitchen. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and ginger were believed to balance the body's humors. Strong spices were thought to counteract spoiled food. This belief encouraged people to eat food they otherwise might have thrown away. Spices didn't neutralize toxins. They only masked them. Preservation methods were just as dangerous. Salt was heavily used, but excessive salt damaged kidneys and caused dehydration. For people already weakened by disease, this could be fatal. Vinegar was another common preservative. It was added to meats and vegetables believed to be unsafe. But vinegar was often diluted with contaminated water, reintroducing bacteria. Shocking fact number A. Medieval preservatives often recontaminated food instead of protecting it. Some preservatives were outright toxic. Certain curing agents contained heavy metals. Lead-based compounds were used to improve color and taste, especially in wine, sauces, and preserved fruits. Lead poisoning caused stomach pain, infertility, mental decline, and death, but symptoms appeared slowly. People never connected it to food. Shocking fact number 3. Medieval people unknowingly poisoned themselves with lead. Used as a food additive, the wealthy consumed more spices and preserved foods than the poor. Ironically, This increased their exposure to toxins. Chronic illness among nobles was often the result of their better diet. Spices gave food the illusion of safety. They allowed people to ignore warning signs. In trying to fix dangerous food, medieval people often made it worse. Chapter 9. Feast or Funeral. When celebrations turned deadly. Feasts were the highlights of medieval life. Weddings, religious holidays, coronations, and victories were all marked by massive meals. For a brief moment, people ate more than survival required, and that excess made feasts dangerous. Food for feasts was prepared in enormous quantities, often days in advance. Without refrigeration, dishes sat at room temperature while bacteria multiplied rapidly. Reheating was common and inconsistent. If food smelled bad, spices were added. If it looked strange, sauces covered it. Shocking fact number 1. Medieval feast food was often cooked days before being served. Meat was a centerpiece of celebration. Multiple animals were slaughtered at once. Not all could be eaten immediately. Rot was inevitable. Large stews and pies trapped heat unevenly, allowing bacteria to survive inside. Guests ate what was placed before them. Refusing food was an insult. Poisoning spread quickly through shared dishes. Alcohol flowed freely at feasts, masking early symptoms of foodborne illness. Vomiting and dizziness were blamed on excess drinking rather than contaminated food. By the time the real cause was suspected, it was too late. Shocking fact number 2. Many medieval feast deaths were blamed on alcohol when food poisoning was the real cause. Utensils were shared. Hands dipped into common bowls. Plates were reused without washing. Illness passed easily from person to person. Feasts also attracted flies, rats, and insects. Food sat uncovered for hours. The wealthy faced additional risk. Elaborate dishes used rare ingredients, heavy spices, and decorative elements, some of which were toxic. Gold and silver leaf sometimes contained impurities. Shocking fact number A. Wealthy banquet foods exposed nobles to more toxins than peasant meals. After feasts, outbreaks of illness swept through households. Servants, guests, and family members fell sick together. Chroniclers describe these events as divine judgment or curses. Celebration turned into mourning. Feasts were meant to display power and generosity, but they also revealed how fragile medieval survival really was. One bad meal could wipe out dozens. Chapter 10. Eating to Survive. Why medieval people accepted the risk. By modern standards, the medieval diet seems terrifying. Poisoned bread, rotten meat, contaminated water, dangerous dairy, toxic plants nearly, everything people ate carried risk. And yet, medieval people continued eating the same foods generation after generation, not because they were ignorant, but because they had no alternative. Hunger was constant. Famine was never far away. A bad harvest, a harsh winter, or a local war could erase food supplies overnight. In that world, refusing food because it was unsafe was a privilege no one could afford. People ate what was available, not what was safe. Starvation was immediate. Poisoning was uncertain. Most chose the risk that allowed them to live another day. Shocking fact number 1. Medieval. People knowingly ate food that had previously made them sick because hunger was more dangerous than illness. Food safety was replaced by belief. If someone survived eating a food once, it was considered acceptable. Deaths were explained through religion, fate, or moral failure, not contaminated meals. This belief system protected dangerous habits. Children learned to eat the same risky foods their parents did. Knowledge was inherited, even when it was wrong. Medical theory didn't help. Doctors believed illness came from imbalanced humors, not food. Treatments often involved eating even more dangerous substances to correct the body. Shocking fact. Number A. Medieval medicine often made food-related illness worse instead of better. The poor suffered the most. Their food was cheaper, older, and more contaminated. But the rich were not safe either. Wealth introduced new dangerous exotic foods, heavy spices, and toxic additives. Death did not discriminate. Survival depended on resilience. Bodies adapted to constant low-level poisoning. Those who survived passed on that tolerance. Those who didn't vanished from the record. Shocking fact number 3. Medieval survival depended less on safe food and more on who could tolerate poison the longest. Over time, food slowly became safer, not through intention but accident. Better farming, cleaner water systems, and improved storage emerged centuries later. No one set out to create food safety. They simply learned through loss. Every meal in the Middle Ages was a gamble. People didn't eat because food was safe. They ate because eating was the only way to keep going. And somehow they survived. Chapter 11. Poison as flavor. When food was used to kill. In the medieval world, poison was not rare. It was familiar. It came from plants, minerals, and even everyday kitchen ingredients. The line between food and weapon was dangerously thin. Poisoning did not always involve assassins or kings. It happened quietly, inside ordinary meals. Many substances used in medieval cooking were toxic in the wrong amount. Certain herbs, roots, and powders could enhance flavor or slowly shut down the body. Because dosage was never precise, every meal carried uncertainty. Lead was one of the most common silent killers. It was used in cookware, cups, and storage containers. Acidic foods like wine, vinegar, and fruit pulled lead directly into the meal. Shocking fact. Number A. Medieval cookware regularly poisoned food with lead during normal use. Symptoms appeared slowly. Stomach, pain, confusion, weakness, infertility. People never suspected their plates. Poison was also political. At courts, fear of poisoning shaped eating habits. Tasters were employed not to sample flavor, but survival. If the taster lived, the food was served. Yet poisoning still happened. Food sat exposed during preparation. Ingredients passed through many hands. Even unintentional contamination could be deadly. Shocking fact number 2. Many medieval poisonings were accidental, caused by toxic ingredients rather than murder. Some poisons mimicked illness. Victims died days later, allowing suspicion to fade. Poison blended perfectly into a world already full of disease. Even peasants weren't safe. Rodenticides, made from toxic plants or minerals, were stored near food. Grain contaminated by poison meant for rats poisoned entire families. Food wasn't just nourishment. It was power, and sometimes it was execution. Chapter 12, Eating Without Choice. The psychological toll of medieval food. Medieval people didn't just risk their bodies. They lived with constant fear of food. Every meal carried anxiety. Would this bread cause pain? Would this water bring sickness? Would this meat kill a child? Yet people learned to suppress fear. Eating was unavoidable. Questioning food too much meant starvation. Over time, danger became normal. Children grew up watching others fall ill after meals. Death after eating was accepted as fate. This shaped a mindset where survival meant endurance, not safety. Shocking fact number 1. Medieval people normalized food-related illness to cope psychologically with constant danger. Religion helped explain fear away. If someone died, it was God's will. If a family survived, it was a blessing. This belief system prevented questioning the food itself. Food became moral. Eating humbly was virtuous. Complaining about food was sinful. This kept people silent even when meals were deadly. Shocking fact. Hash 2. Questioning food safety was discouraged by religious and social pressure. The result was generational trauma. Knowledge of danger existed, but without solutions, it became resignation. People accepted suffering as part of life. Even joy around food was restrained. Feasts were followed by fear. Hunger cycles trained bodies and minds to expect loss. Shocking fact. Number A. Medieval survival required emotional numbness toward food-related suffering. Modern food safety didn't emerge because people demanded it. It emerged because centuries of suffering made it unavoidable. Medieval people survived not because food was safe, but because they learned to live with danger at every meal. By modern standards, the medieval diet sounds like a horror story. Poisoned bread, rotten meat, contaminated water, food that could burn your body, rot your teeth, or slowly kill you without warning. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Medieval people didn't eat this way because they were foolish. They ate this way because survival demanded it. Every meal was a gamble. Not eating meant death. Eating meant maybe death. And yet they sat down every day. They broke bread. They fed their children. They kept going. History often celebrates kings, wars, and victories. But real survival happened at the table, where ordinary people swallowed fear along with their food. So next time you complain about expired milk or food that tastes slightly off, remember this. For most of human history, eating was never safe. It was brave. This has been boring history. If you want more stories about how everyday life nearly killed people in the past, don't leave yet. The next video is already waiting.